Let's assume, for purposes of this argument, that the inflation rate is running at some 15%, which means that each year the price of commodities or goods, services that you buy becomes 15% more expensive. Now, that means that if at the age of 20 you have 1,000 Rand accumulated, or you have 1,000 Rand available to invest, and you put that investment into a fixed deposit at a bank or whatever, and that investment earns you a 15% rate of return, then it stands to reason that you're making no progress at all, because the return you're getting from your investment is just enough to offset the rate of inflation. Which means that in a period of, let's say, 45 years, which is a lifetime of working, the average person who might be working from age 20 to age 65 is in fact working over a period of some 45 years. This person's 1,000 Rand at 15% return would grow to roughly some 538,000 Rand. Now, what you must know is that 538,000 Rand is worth no more at the age of 65 than that 1,000 Rand was worth when you were 20 years of age. Simply because you have managed just to cover the rate of inflation. You've just kept up to date with the cost of living increases. The inflation rate and your return are exactly the same. So that amount of money at age 65 will buy you 10 loaves of bread, as the 1,000 Rand would have bought you at age 20, 10 loaves of bread. So you're no better off. Now, let's assume that person, Mr. X, has been risk averse. In other words, Mr. X has not been prepared to take a chance with his investments. And Mr. X, at the age of 20, had 1,000 Rand to invest, and he felt that he wanted a guaranteed return, and that guaranteed return that he earned over all those years was 10%. In other words, Mr. X was 5% behind the rate of inflation. This means that at the age of 65, when Mr. X retires, is that the amount he would have accumulated is around about 72,000 Rand. In other words, for every 7 Rand that he should have, in order to have kept that 1,000 Rand being worth what it was when he was 20, he now has only 1 Rand. So he is 1/7 as well off as he should be. Let's look now at somebody else. Let's call it Ms. Y. And this lady has taken time, trouble to learn about investments, and she has been prepared to invest on the higher end of the risk-return continuum. And Ms. Y, through her knowledge and experience, has invested in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and she has achieved a return of 20% over the past 45 years, between the ages of 20 and 65. Now, that's not an unrealistic return, given that in the past 25 years, the stock market has given investors back an average return of 22%. So 20% would be considered an average return for an investor on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. At 20% return, Mrs. Y, who also has 1,000 Rand available, that 1,000 Rand will now have grown to some 3,500,000 Rand at 20%. In other words, in order to have kept pace with inflation, you would have had to have about 500,000. If you were prepared to take the time out to learn about the investment environment and have increased your earnings from the 15% base rate to 20% earnings, you will have some 7 times more than what you would have had on retiring at 15% return. 7 times more holidays, 7 times more clothing, 7 times more outings, 7 times more of whatever it is that your lifestyle wants. And that's a very, very significant meaning to somebody who's at their retirement age and who is looking for a return that is able to sustain their lives. And the hard reality is that the average South African is not financially prepared for retirement. The average South African is reliant upon a state pension, reliant upon having to work beyond retirement, or is reliant upon family. The statistics are really shocking because they show us that less than 10% of South Africans are financially independent once they retire. And the the lesson to be learned here is very, very clear. In order for us to be in a situation where we're able to cope with our retirement, we need to have to operate in that higher end of the risk-return investment environment. Let's have one last look at so many South Africans who believe that they don't need to invest, they don't need to learn about investments because they're okay, their pension will look after them. Here are a couple of hard facts about that. Is that the average South African, when they retire, has worked for 15 years for their most recent employer. The average South African has worked for 15 years. Now, if you want to work out at 15 years what percentage of your final salary you are going to earn as a retiree, you must multiply the number of years worked by 2. And the answer that you get, in this case 15 times 2 being 30, the answer that you get is the percentage of the amount of your most recent salary that you will receive as a pensioner or a retiree. So, if you retire and are used to earning 10,000 Rand per month, on the day that you retire, let's say at age 65, that earning will now be cut down to 30% of that amount. So as a retired person, your 10,000 Rand per month will immediately shrink to 3,000 Rand per month, given that you've worked for your most recent employer for a period of 15 years. Now, given the rate of inflation that I talked about earlier, in other words, 15% inflation, which means that every year the cost of living increases by 15%, we can determine that over a period of 5 years, the cost of living will double. In other words, at 15% inflation, every 5 years, it's going to cost you twice as much to simply get by. So that means, or another way of looking at it, is that the 3,000 Rand that you had available to spend at the age of 65, by the time you turn 70, that 3,000 Rand now becomes worth half of what it used to be worth, given that the cost of living has doubled. So you are now living off a monthly amount of 1,500 Rand. Take that one step further when you are 75 years of age, and by no means is this considered to be old by today's standards, because the average male today is living to 72 years of age. In other words, the average male who has retired is living up to the age of 72. The average female is living up to the age of 75, and that age, therefore, is by no means considered to be old by today's standards. However, your 1,500 Rand per month that you had available to spend has now once again halved after that 5-year period and is now only worth 750 Rand. Take it a step further to the age of 80, and that is now down to 375 Rand a month. This is the same person who was, when they were economically active, who was earning 10,000 Rands per month. So their earnings have been slashed down to 375 Rand per month. And I ask you whether it's possible for that person to survive. And I'm sure you'd recognize that the answer is no. So we need to take very, very serious cognizance of our investment life, because it's what we do during those economically active years that will determine our standard of living once we have made our exit from the economic world of work.